You're doing things every single day that feel normal, feel harmless, feel like just part of life, and those things, those seemingly innocent patterns, are the reason you're stuck, not the obvious stuff, not the big failures, not the dramatic moments, but the quiet daily habits. You don't even notice anymore, the ones you've normalized, the ones you'd defend if someone pointed them out, the ones that feel like they're keeping you functional, when really they're keeping you frozen. And here's what makes this so insidious. You think you're doing fine, you think the problem is somewhere else, is something bigger, is the circumstances, the economy, the other people. But it's not. It's the small things, the daily things, the habits you repeat without thinking that are compounding against you. Building a life you don't want one unremarkable day at a time. The Stoics understood this deeply. They knew that character isn't built in grand moments. It's built in the daily repetitions, in the choices nobody sees. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts, and your thoughts are shaped by your habits, by what you do every morning, every evening, every moment in between and right now. Those habits, they're dyeing your soul the wrong color. They're programming you for stagnation, for comfort, for staying exactly where you are. And if you're ready to see it, if you're ready to look at the patterns you've been blind to, if you're ready to understand why, despite all your trying, all your wanting, all your hoping, nothing fundamental is changing, then stay here, because what I'm about to show you won't be comfortable. It's going to expose the ways you're sabotaging yourself every single day without even knowing it. And once you see it, once you recognize the pattern, you can't unsee it. You'll have to choose whether to keep doing it, knowing what it costs, or finally change it. And that choice, that moment of accountability, that's where growth begins. Let me tell you something you already know but haven't admitted. Your days are running you. You're not running them. You wake up and immediately you react. You grab your phone, you check messages, notifications, emails. What happened while you slept? What people said, what the world did. And in those first few minutes, those critical first moments of consciousness, you've already surrendered. You've already given the day permission to tell you what matters, to set your emotional tone, to determine your priorities. And you think this is normal. You think everyone does it. And you're right, everyone does, and that's exactly why everyone's stuck. Because the first habit you're overlooking, the one that's quietly destroying your sense of agency, your ability to lead your own life, is that you start every single day in reaction mode. You let the external world set your internal state before you've even left bed. And once that pattern is set, once you've begun the day by responding to everyone else's agenda, you spend the rest of the day playing catch-up, feeling behind, feeling pulled, feeling like life is happening to you instead of through you. Here's what most people don't understand: the first hour of your day, it's not just time, it's programming, it's setting the operating system for everything that follows. And if the first thing you do is check what everyone else wants, what everyone else thinks, what everyone else is doing, you're programming yourself to be reactive, to be secondary, to be a responder instead of an initiator. And that programming, it runs all day. You're not making decisions from your center, from your values, from your vision. You're making decisions in reaction to inputs, to demands, to notifications. And by the time the day ends, you're exhausted. Not because you did meaningful work, but because you spent the entire day being pulled in directions you never chose. Marcus Aurelius had a morning practice. He'd remind himself of his principles, of who he was, of what mattered before he engaged with the chaos of ruling Rome. He wrote at dawn, when you have trouble getting out of bed, "Tell yourself, I have to go to work as a human being. What do I have to complain of if I'm going to do what I was born for?" He wasn't checking what Rome wanted from him first. He was checking what he wanted from himself. And that orientation, that choice to lead instead of react, is what allowed him to stay centered when everything around him was chaos. You need that same practice. You need to reclaim your mornings, not with some elaborate routine, not with an hour of rituals, just with 5 minutes of intentionality. 5 minutes where you sit, where you breathe, where you remind yourself who you are, what you're building, what matters today, and only after that, only after you've set your own tone, only after you've established your own priority, then you engage with the world. Then you check the messages, then you respond, but you respond as someone who knows what they're about, not as someone who's just reacting to whatever comes. I know someone who spent years feeling overwhelmed, feeling behind, feeling like they could never get ahead, and their whole morning was chaos. Alarm, snooze, phone, social media, email, panic, and they'd hit the day already, stressed, already reactive, already feeling like they were losing. And one day they changed it. They bought an alarm clock, a real one. So the phone stayed in another room, and they gave themselves 10 minutes before they engaged with anything. Just sitting, just breathing, just asking, what matters today? And that shift, that simple reclamation of the morning, it changed everything, not because the circumstances changed, but because they stopped starting every day in surrender. They stopped giving the world permission to set their tone, and they started setting it themselves. Epictetus taught that the chief task in life is to identify and separate matters so that I can say clearly to myself which are externals not under my control, and which have to do with the choices I actually control. And the first choice every day, the most important choice, is whether you control your morning or your morning controls. Whether you lead or react. Whether you set the tone or let the tone be set for you. And right now you're letting it be set. And that's the first habit that's blocking your growth. So here's what changes. Starting tomorrow, you don't touch your phone for the first 30 minutes. You don't check anything. You don't engage with anyone's agenda, but your own. You sit. You think you set your intention, and then only then do you let the world in and watch what happens. Watch how the day feels different, how you feel different, how you're no longer being pulled. You're choosing, and that choosing, that agency, that's the foundation everything else builds on. The second habit you're overlooking is more subtle, but just as destructive. You're seeking comfort in your problems. You're finding identity in your struggles, and that attachment, that investment in being the person who's going through something, it's keeping you exactly where you are, because if you solved the problem, if you actually grew past it, who would you be? What would you talk about? What would explain why you're not where you want to be? And so unconsciously, maybe even unknowingly, you keep the problem alive, you rehearse it, you talk about it, you make it central to your story, and you call this being real, being authentic, being honest, when really it's just being stuck. Here's what this looks like. You have the same complaint, the same struggle, the same obstacle, and you've been talking about it for months, maybe years. Maybe it's your job that drains you. Maybe it's your relationship that's difficult. Maybe it's your health that's not where you want it. And every time someone asks how you are, you launch into it. You give them the update, the latest chapter in the ongoing saga. And in that moment, in that retelling, you're not processing, you're not seeking solution. You're reinforcing, you're making the problem more real, more central, more part of who you are. And the more you do this, the more you identify with it, the harder it becomes to let it go, because letting it go means letting go of a part of your identity, means losing the thing that gives you something to talk about, something to bond over, something to explain why you're not further along. I've watched people do this with everything, with their childhood trauma, with their difficult boss, with their financial struggles, and yes, those things are real. Yes, they matter, but there's a difference between acknowledging a problem and marrying it, between processing pain and performing it. And when you cross that line, when the problem becomes your identity, you stop looking for solutions, because solving it would require becoming someone new. someone without that problem, and that's terrifying, that's unknown. And so you keep the problem, you keep the story, you keep the identity, and you wonder why nothing changes when the answer is you're invested in it not changing, because change would cost you the comfort of the familiar narrative. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "How much time he gains who does not look to see what his neighbor says or does or thinks, but only at what he does himself to make it just and holy." And what he meant is this: stop rehearsing your problems, stop comparing your struggles, stop performing your difficulties, and start focusing on what you're doing about them. Because rehearsal without action is just entertainment. It's keeping yourself busy with the problem instead of busy with the solution. Seneca saw this pattern in everyone around him. He wrote, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." And when you keep talking about the problem, keep thinking about the problem, keep identifying with the problem you're suffering in imagination, you're keeping it alive in your mind long after the actual event, long after the useful processing and that imagined suffering, that rehearsed struggle. It's not helping you, it's defining you, and definition is limitation. Here's the test. Think about your biggest problem right now, the thing you talk about the most, and ask yourself honestly, how much of my energy goes into talking about this versus solving this? How much am I invested in this being part of my story versus being part of my past? And if you're honest, if you're really honest, you'll probably find that you're more invested in having the problem than solving it. Not because you're broken, but because you're human, and humans seek comfort. And there's a strange comfort in familiar pain and known struggle in problems that explain why you're not where you want to be. But here's what you need to understand, that comfort is costing you growth, costing you progress, costing you the version of yourself that exists on the other side of the problem. And as long as you keep it, as long as you hold it, as long as you make it central to your identity, you'll never get there. You'll never become that person, because that person doesn't have this problem, and you're not ready to be someone who doesn't have this problem. So here's what changes. You stop rehearsing, you stop performing, you stop seeking comfort in the familiar struggle, and you start seeking growth in unfamiliar territory. The next time someone asks how you are and you feel the urge to launch into the problem, stop and say something different. Say, "I'm working on something," or "I'm figuring it out," or even just "I'm good," and then actually be good, actually work on it, actually figure it out, because the story you tell about yourself becomes the life you live, and right now, you're telling a story that keeps you stuck. The third habit blocking your growth is one you probably think is smart. You're surrounding yourself with ease, with comfort, with people and environments that don't challenge you, that don't push you, that let you stay exactly as you are. And you think this is self-care, you think this is protecting your peace, you think this is healthy boundaries, when really it's just insulation. It's wrapping yourself in cotton, so you never have to feel the sharp edges that would shape you. And without those edges, without that friction, without that challenge, you don't grow, you just maintain, you just exist in a comfortable loop that never demands more from you than you're already giving. Here's the truth you already know, but don't want to face. Growth requires friction, requires challenge, requires being around people who are better than you at things you want to improve, who call you on your excuses, who expect more from you than you expect from yourself. And those people, those environments, they're uncomfortable. They make you feel inadequate. They expose your gaps. They show you how far you have to go. And instead of leaning into that, instead of using it as fuel, you avoid it. You surround yourself with people who make you feel good, who don't challenge you, who accept you exactly as you are. And that acceptance, that comfort, it feels like love when really it's just enabling. I know someone who wanted to get in shape for years, talked about it, planned it, bought the gear, and never did it. And when I asked why, they said they didn't feel comfortable at the gym. Everyone there was so fit, so serious, so intense. and they'd feel judged, feel out of place, feel like they didn't belong. And I understood that. I understood the discomfort, but here's what they didn't understand: that discomfort, that feeling of being the weakest person in the room. That's not the obstacle, that's the opportunity. Because being around people who are stronger, faster, more disciplined, that's what pulls you up. That's what shows you what's possible. That's what makes you better. But only if you stay. Only if you let the discomfort sharpen you, instead of using it as a reason to leave. Marcus Aurelius was surrounded by people who challenged him, advisors who disagreed, philosophers who questioned, generals who demanded, and he could have surrounded himself with yes men, with people who made him comfortable, with courtiers who praised everything he did. But he didn't, because he understood that comfort breeds complacency, and complacency is death for someone trying to rule well, trying to live well, trying to grow. Epictetus taught his students, if you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid. And what he meant is you have to be willing to be the beginner, to be the one who doesn't know, to be around people who are better than you, and let that gap, that distance between where they are and where you are, motivate you instead of discourage you. But most people can't handle that gap. It makes them feel small, so they avoid it. They stay in environments where they're the smartest, the most accomplished, the most together, and they never grow. Because growth doesn't happen in rooms where you're the best. It happens in rooms where you're challenged, where you're pushed, where you're uncomfortable. Here's what this looks like. Practically look at the 5 people you spend the most time with. Are they growing? Are they pushing themselves? Are they doing things that scare them? Or are they comfortable? Are they stuck? Are they complaining about the same things they complained about last year? Because those people, that environment, it's shaping you. It's setting your standard. It's determining what's normal. And if normal is stagnation, if normal is comfort, if normal is avoiding challenge, then that's what you'll become. Not because you chose it consciously, but because you absorbed it through proximity, through repetition, through the daily habit of surrounding yourself with ease. Seneca wrote, "Associate with people who are likely to improve you. Welcome those who you can improve." A relationship of this sort brings mutual benefit, and mutual benefit means friction, means challenge, means both of you pushing each other to be better, not tearing each other down, but not letting each other settle either. And if you don't have that, if your relationships are all comfort, all acceptance, all ease, then you're missing the mechanism that creates growth. So here's what changes. You start seeking friction. You put yourself in rooms where you're the least experienced. You surround yourself with people who make you uncomfortable in a good way, who show you what's possible, who don't let you make excuses. And yes, it will be uncomfortable. Yes, you'll feel inadequate. Yes, you'll want to retreat back to the comfortable people who accept you as you are, but you don't. You stay. You let the discomfort work on you, shape you, sharpen you, because that's how you grow. Not through comfort, but through challenge. Not through ease, but through friction. And right now, you're avoiding it, and that avoidance is keeping you exactly where you are. The 4th habit you're overlooking happens at the end of every day, and it's the reason you keep making the same mistakes, keep facing the same obstacles, keep wondering why nothing sticks. You're not reflecting, you're not reviewing, you're not learning from what happened. You just survive the day, and then you escape from it. You distract, you numb, you scroll, you watch, you consume, and the day disappears without ever being examined, without ever being processed, without the lessons it contained ever being extracted. And so tomorrow you do it all again. The same patterns, the same reactions, the same mistakes, because you never created a feedback loop, never built the mechanism that turns experience into wisdom. Here's what happens to most people. The day ends, and they're tired, they're done, they're checked out. And the last thing they want to do is think about the day, so they put on a show, they scroll social media, they have a drink, they do anything to avoid being alone with their thoughts, with what happened, with how they showed up. And in that avoidance, in that escape, they lose the value, they lose the growth, they lose the opportunity to learn from the 8 or 10 or 12 hours they just lived. And those hours, they're gone forever. You can't get them back. You can't relive them, but you can extract their value. You can learn from them. You can ask what worked, what didn't, what would I do differently? And in asking those questions, in building that practice, you create a feedback loop that turns every day into education instead of just experience. Marcus Aurelius practiced this every night. He'd review the day, ask himself where he succeeded, where he fell short, what he could improve. And he didn't do this to torture himself, to dwell on failures. He did it to learn to adjust, to become better tomorrow than he was today. And that practice, that daily review, is what allowed him to grow, is what allowed him to refine his character, is what allowed him to become the philosopher king instead of just another emperor who had power but no wisdom. Epictetus taught his students, "Let sleep not close your eyes," before 3 times reflecting on your actions. What did I do amiss? What did I do? What did I leave undone? And that reflection, that examination is not optional. It's essential, because without it, you're just repeating patterns. You're just living on autopilot. You're not steering. You're just drifting, and drift doesn't lead to growth. It leads to wherever the current takes you, and the current usually leads to more of the same. I know people who've had the same problems for 5 years, the same relationship issues, the same work struggles, the same personal challenges, and they wonder why. They wonder what's wrong with them, why they can't break through, and the answer is simple. They never examine the pattern. They never sit with what happened. Never ask, what's my part in this? What am I doing that creates this result? What could I do differently? They just react. They just survive. They just move from day to day without ever stopping to learn. And without learning, there's no growth. There's just repetition. Seneca wrote, "Every day, acquire something that will fortify you against poverty, against death, indeed against other misfortunes as well. And after you have run over many thoughts, select one to be thoroughly digested that day." And that's the practice, that's the habit, not consuming more information, not reading more books, but digesting what you've already experienced, extracting the lesson, processing the day, and carrying forward something learned, something earned, something that makes tomorrow different from today. Here's the practice that changes this: 10 minutes before bed. No phone, no TV, no distraction. Just you and a notebook, or just you and your thoughts. And you ask 3 questions. What went well today? What didn't go well today? What will I do differently tomorrow? And you answer honestly. You write it down. And in that practice, in that daily examination, you build the feedback loop. You create the mechanism that turns experience into wisdom, that turns days into growth, that turns years into transformation instead of just more time passed. Because time without reflection is just time. But time with reflection is education, and education compounds, and compounding is how you become someone different, someone better, someone who doesn't make the same mistakes forever because they actually learned from them. The 5th habit blocking your growth is one you think is productive. You're consuming constantly, endlessly, without ever creating. You're reading, watching, listening, learning, always learning, and you think this is growth, you think this is improvement, when really it's just sophisticated avoidance. It's input without output, it's gathering without building, it's knowing without doing, and knowledge without application isn't wisdom. It's just trivia, it's just mental clutter, it's just another way to avoid the real work, which is creating, applying, doing. Here's the pattern you probably recognize. You read a book about productivity, and then you look for another book about productivity. You watch a video about discipline, and then you watch 10 more. You listen to a podcast about building a business, and then you research more podcasts about building businesses. And you're learning, you're absorbing, you're taking it all in, and you feel productive, you feel like you're doing something. But what are you actually producing? What have you created? What have you built? What exists in the world now that didn't exist before? And the answer is usually nothing, because you're stuck in consumption mode, in learning mode, in preparation mode, and you never switch to creation mode, to application mode, to building mode. Marcus Aurelius read, constantly studied, constantly learned from the great philosophers, but he didn't just consume, he applied, he wrote, he ruled, he made decisions, he created through his actions, through his leadership, through his philosophy, and that balance, that equilibrium between input and output is what made him effective, what made him wise, what made his learning matter, because it wasn't just knowledge. It was knowledge put into practice, and practice is what creates results. Epictetus was even more direct. He said, don't explain your philosophy, embody it. And embodiment requires creation, requires application, requires taking what you've learned and actually doing something with it. And most people never get there. They stay in the explanation phase, in the learning phase, in the consuming phase, because it's safe, because it feels like progress, because you can't fail at learning. You can only fail at doing, and doing is scary. Doing is vulnerable. Doing reveals whether you actually understand, whether you're actually capable, whether the knowledge you've been consuming actually translates to skill. I've seen this destroy people's potential more than anything else. People who've read every book on entrepreneurship, but never started a business. People who've watched every video on fitness, but never consistently trained. People who've consumed everything about relationships, but never had a difficult conversation, and they wonder why they're stuck, why nothing changes, why despite all this learning, they're not growing. And the answer is because learning isn't growing, application is growing, creation is growing, doing is growing, and they're not doing, they're just consuming. Seneca warned about this. He said, "It is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more that is poor." And you're craving more input, more information, more content, more knowledge, when what you need is less consuming and more creating, less input and more output, less learning and more applying, because the value isn't in knowing, the value is in doing. And enough. You've learned enough, you've consumed enough, what you haven't done is created enough. Here's what changes starting today. You set a ratio for every hour of consumption. 1 hour of creation for every book you read. You write something for every video you watch. You build something for every podcast you listen to. You apply something and you make creation. The priority, not consumption. You make output the goal, not input, because output is what changes your life. Output is what builds skills. Output is what creates results. Consumption just makes you feel busy while keeping you stuck in the same place. So stop consuming and start creating. Stop learning and start applying. Stop preparing and start doing. Because the gap between where you are and where you want to be, it's not a knowledge gap, it's an action gap, and you're filling it with the wrong thing. The sixth habit you're overlooking is the most insidious, because it looks like discipline, it looks like productivity, it looks like you're doing everything right. You're optimizing, you're systematizing, you're improving, but you're optimizing the wrong things. You're making the unimportant extremely efficient, while the important remains completely untouched. You're perfecting your morning routine, your productivity system, your note-taking method, your calendar, your workspace, and all of it. All that optimization is just avoiding the one thing that would actually move the needle. The uncomfortable thing, the uncertain thing, the thing you don't know how to do. Yet, here's what this looks like. You spend an hour organizing your task management system, color-coding priorities, setting up filters, building the perfect workflow, and you feel productive. You feel like you're working, but what did you actually accomplish? What moved forward? What result did you create? And the answer is nothing. You optimized the system, you didn't do the work, And optimizing systems feels good, feels smart, feels like progress, when really it's just another form of resistance, another way to avoid the hard thing, the thing that actually matters. I've watched people spend weeks building the perfect business plan, the perfect brand identity, the perfect social media strategy, and never once talk to a customer, never once make a sale, never once put themselves out there in a way that risks rejection, because all that planning, all that optimizing, it's safe, it's controllable, it's something you can do alone in your room without ever facing the marketplace, without ever discovering if what you built is actually what people want. Marcus Aurelius could have spent his time optimizing the bureaucracy, perfecting the systems, making the Roman administration more efficient. But that wasn't what mattered. What mattered was virtue, was justice, was doing what was right, and he focused on that. He focused on the thing that couldn't be systematized, the thing that required judgment, required wisdom, required showing up as his best self. And that focus, that clarity about what actually matters, is what made him great. Not his systems, but his character. Epictetus taught this principle directly. He said, some things are up to us, and some things are not. And optimizing systems, optimizing processes, optimizing everything, except your character, except your decisions, except your actual work that's focusing on what's not up to you, that's trying to control the controllable while avoiding the thing that actually is controllable, which is whether you do the hard thing, whether you face the uncertainty, whether you take the risk. Here's the truth you need to hear. Your productivity system is fine. Your morning routine is fine. Your note-taking method is fine. You don't need to optimize them. What you need is to use them to actually do the work they're supposed to support. And if you're spending more time improving the system than using the system, then the system isn't the point. The avoidance is, Seneca wrote it, is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it. And you're wasting it not by doing nothing, but by doing things that feel productive, while avoiding the thing that would actually create the result. And that avoidance, that optimization of the trivial, it's keeping you stuck, it's keeping you safe, it's keeping you from ever finding out if you're actually capable of the thing you say you want. So here's what changes. You stop optimizing and you start executing. You identify the one thing, the uncomfortable thing, the thing you've been avoiding by perfecting everything around it. And you do that thing imperfectly and efficiently, with a terrible system if necessary, because doing it badly is infinitely more valuable than not doing it at all, while having the perfect system for how you would do it, if you ever got around to it. Ask yourself right now, what's the thing that, if I did, it consistently would actually change my life? And what am I optimizing to avoid doing it? And once you have that answer, stop optimizing and start doing, because the perfect system for doing the wrong thing is still the wrong thing, and the imperfect system for doing the right thing is still the right thing. Here's what ties all 6 habits together. They're all forms of avoidance. They're all ways you're keeping yourself comfortable, keeping yourself safe, keeping yourself from the edge where growth happens. You start your day reacting so you don't have to lead. You find identity in your problems so you don't have to solve them. You surround yourself with ease so you don't have to be challenged. You avoid reflection so you don't have to change. You consume instead of create so you don't have to risk, and you optimize the trivial so you don't have to face the important, and all of it all. 6 habits, they feel normal, they feel fine, they feel like just how life is, when really they're the architecture of your stagnation. They're the daily patterns that are building a life. You don't want one overlooked habit at a time. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way, and what's standing in your way isn't external, isn't circumstances, isn't other people. It's these habits, it's the patterns you repeat, without examining the choices you make, without questioning the comfortable grooves you've worn into your days. And the solution, the path forward, It's not complicated. It's just uncomfortable. It requires you to see what you've been overlooking, to face what you've been avoiding, to change what you've been repeating. And that change, it starts with awareness, with looking honestly at your days, at your patterns, at your habits, and asking which of these is serving me and which of these is keeping me stuck. Epictetus said, first say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do. And what you have to do is break these patterns, is build different habits, is create different days that compound into a different life. Not someday, not eventually, but starting now, starting with tomorrow morning, when you don't reach for your phone, when you set your own tone, when you lead instead of react, and then continuing through the day, when you stop rehearsing your problems, when you seek friction instead of comfort, when you reflect instead of escape, when you create instead of consume, when you do the important thing instead of optimizing. The trivial Seneca wrote, begin at once to live and count each separate day as a separate life. And today, this day, it can be different. It can be the day you stop overlooking what's been blocking you, the day you face what you've been avoiding, the day you choose growth over comfort, over familiar, over easy. Because growth doesn't happen in comfort. It happens at the edge. And these 6 habits, they're keeping you far from that edge. They're keeping you in the center, in the safe zone, in the comfortable middle, where nothing changes, where nothing grows, where you stay exactly who you've been, instead of becoming who you could be. So here's what happens next. Here's the choice. You can keep these habits. You can keep overlooking them. You can keep defending them. You can keep telling yourself, they're not that bad. They're not the problem. The problem is something else, something external, something you can't control, and you can stay there, stay stuck, stay comfortable, stay the same. Or you can change. You can see the habits for what they are. You can face what you've been overlooking. You can build different patterns, different days, different weeks, that compound into different years, that compound into a different life. And that change, it doesn't require perfection, doesn't require getting all 6 right immediately. It just requires starting. It requires choosing one and changing it, and then choosing another and changing that. And slowly, daily, through small, overlooked choices in the other direction, you become someone different, someone growing, someone who's finally closing the gap between effort and results, between trying and transforming, between wanting to grow and actually growing. The habits you overlook don't seem important, don't seem like they matter, don't seem like they're the thing, but they're everything, because your life is just your days, and your days are just your habits, and your habits repeated over time become your destiny. And right now, your habits are building a destiny you don't want, but you can change that. You can build different habits. You can create different days. You can become someone who doesn't overlook what matters, someone who faces what's hard, someone who grows, not because circumstances changed, but because you did. Stay focused, stay grounded, and remember, the things you overlook every day are the things that are building you. So stop overlooking, start seeing, start changing, and watch how the growth you've been chasing was always available. It was just blocked by habits you didn't even know you had until now, and now you know, so now you choose.